The man in black glasses carried on with his reread and his YouTube subscribers followed. Time for my reread of The Gunslinger. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave Musson and this is the place where I talk to you about all things Stephen King. And in this video, I'm continuing my chronological reread through the fiction works of Stephen King. And I'm in 1982 and the start of what turned out to be an epic journey for Stephen King. Potentially a journey that many years from now might end up being his career-defining journey. I don't think it will, but you never know. I'm talking about The Gunslinger, the first book in the Dark Tower series. And, well, in this video, I'm going to be rereading it. I'm not just going to be rereading it once, though, because some of you may know Stephen King revised The Gunslinger in 2003 to tie it all up together in preparation for finishing the Dark Tower series. So there are two editions of The Gunslinger. And just like I did in my rereading of The Stand, I'm going to read both of them. So I'm going to be rereading the original text, which I've read twice before. And I'm going to be reading the revised edition, which actually I have never read before. So it's a mixture of reread and first time read. And I'm very excited to do it. Now, if you've watched any of my previous rereads, and you can find the full playlists up there, you'll know how I like to do them. I give you a little vlog of my experience rereading the book, and then I go through quite a lengthy analysis section at the end where I offer some overall thoughts. I pick out some of my favourite things and my least favourite things. I score it against my Stephen King bingo card, so that's 19 tropes that come up time and time again in King's work. I pick out things I noticed for the first time in this read, so things like character names, events, references to other books, all of that kind of stuff. I'll pick out some of my favourite lines, and I'll give this book a score out of 5, and this time we'll be giving it a score out of 5 towers. Now you will know if you've watched any of those before that, like with the vlogging and stuff, these are not spoiler-free reviews. I'm going to be talking about what's happening in the books. Now, with the Dark Tower, obviously I've done the journey to the tower twice. I know what happens. But you can be rest assured with this video and other Dark Tower ones, I'm not going to spoil anything that I haven't got to yet in this chronological reread. So this video will talk in depth about The Gunslinger, but I won't talk about anything else after that. So just bear that in mind if you're weighing up whether to watch this or not. Okay? Now, before I get into the vlog, and obviously before I get to the lengthy analysis section at the end, what I like to do at the start of these videos is give you a bit of background about the book, talk about my relationship to the book as well, and show you my editions and tell you which one I'm going to be using for this reread. And I usually do it in that order. Might change it up a little bit here, purely because there's some really useful stuff about the book, particularly the revised edition, in the foreword to the revised edition, which I'm probably going to read from. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you my editions first. So I have two copies, one of the original version and one of the revised edition. So here is my copy of the original text. This is a early 90s UK paperback. I love the artwork on it. They did editions for the first 3 Dark Tower books in this style, and then none of the others, but I really like this. And then this is my revised edition, which comes from, if you can see it there, this set right here, where I've got 8 books that make up a big picture, but that's my revised edition. Now, when it comes to The Gunslinger, I mean, you can get a sense of the differences between the books, and we'll go into that in a minute. Basically, King revised it to tie it into the tower, but to make it more readable. And if I read you the blurbs on the back of these 2 books, you can sense how different the style of writing is. So, on the original one, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. As the world moved on, he followed for a nameless time, naked between the unforgiving sun and the sterile sand, blind in the bowers of the mountains where no light penetrates, shadowed by dangers both magic and physical, the gunslinger moved steadily on his destined path. For beyond the hazards of the way, the crazed seer, the speaking demon, the slow mutants, the undead boy, and yet stranger sorceries, he would hear on the night that was 10 years long of the Dark Tower, nexus of time and space, the tower where he would one day come, winding his horn for some unimaginable final battle. Cool, doesn't really tell you anything, does it? And then on the back of this one, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. In a desolate reality, one that mirrors our own in frightening ways, a lone and haunting figure known only as Roland makes his way across the endless sands in pursuit of a sinister, dark-robed mystery of a man. Roland is the last of his kind, a gunslinger, charged with protecting whatever goodness and light remains in his world, a world that moved on, as they say. And the only way he can possibly hope to save everything is to first outwit and confront this man in black, then make him divulge his many arcane secrets. For despite the countless miles he's already traversed, Roland knows these will merely be his initial steps on his spellbinding and soul-shattering quest to locate the mystical nexus of all worlds, all universes, the Dark Tower. Definitely a better blurb on the back of that one. And just in terms of the accessibility, way more accessible there. So these two books, the first one came out on the 10th of June 1982 in a very limited run, and it was a collecting together actually of 5 short stories that had appeared in the magazine of science fiction and fantasy, I think it is. Let me just check. Yeah, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. So we have The Gunslinger, which appeared in there in 1978, The Way Station, which was in 1980, The Oracle in the Mountains in 81, The Slow Mutants also in 81, later that year, and then finally at the end of that year, The Gunslinger and The Dark Man. So those are your 5 sections of the book, and they all appeared in that magazine first. And this book is actually dedicated to Ed Furman, who is the editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, who took a chance on these stories, as King says in his dedication. But The Gunslinger was pulling them together into a book, and it was a very limited run. And like legend among King readers is that basically a lot of people didn't know about it until King's bibliography was published in Pet Sematary in 1983, and it might even have been in the paperback of Pet Sematary, which would have been 84. Basically, this thing, The Gunslinger, was listed, and in fact, Bev Vincent told this story when I interviewed him on this channel, so do check that one out if you haven't already. But that just basically caused a surge of King fans to trying to get hold of this book, this Gunslinger thing. And then eventually it became a mass market paperback in 1987 when The Drawing of the Three was going to come out. And obviously it is now very widely available. And then, as I mentioned, King decided he wanted to revisit it ahead of the final editions of the Dark Tower story coming out in 2003 and 2004. So he did exactly that. And on the 23rd of June 2003, the revised edition came out. And like I said, I'm going to be reading both. I'm really excited to read both and do that parallel read. I know that doing the parallel read was a tough experience in The Stand, but this is nowhere near as long as The Stand, so I don't think it'll be quite so bad. And this is the first book in the Dark Tower series. So this is where we meet Roland, our gunslinger, who is the main character we follow throughout the Dark Tower series. And yeah, it's an interesting one. Looking at King's foreword for the revised edition, there's some telling stuff here. So he says he only adds about 9,000 words in this, whereas for comparison in The Stand, he added about 100,000. But what I like is here, it says, before I close, I should say a word about the younger man who dared to write this book. That young man had been exposed to far too many writing seminars and had grown far too used to the ideas those seminars promulgate, that one is writing for other people rather than oneself, that language is more important than story, that ambiguity is to be preferred over clarity and simplicity, which are usually signs of a thick and literal mind. As a result, I was not surprised to find a high degree of pretension in Roland's debut appearance, not to mention what seemed like thousands of unnecessary adverbs. I removed as much of this hollow blather as I could, and do not regret a single cut made in that regard. And he also says in this introduction, so when I looked back at this first volume, 3 obvious truths presented themselves. The first was that The Gunslinger had been written by a very young man, and had all the problems of a very young man's book. The second was that it contained a great many errors and false starts, particularly in light of the volumes that followed. And the third was that The Gunslinger did not even sound like the later books. It was frankly rather difficult to read. All too often I heard myself apologising for it and telling people that if they persevered they would find the story really found its voice in the drawing of the three. But that is a perfect point for me to transition into my relationship to The Gunslinger. So, The Dark Tower was the last thing I read of King's when I first got into reading him. It would have been about 2012, 2013, probably 2012. By that point, I'd read everything and I'd been leaving the Dark Tower until last because I knew it had this mythical, epic status. And I had all the books queued up and I was going to just read them bang, 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 straight through, back to back. And I read The Gunslinger and got to the end and was like, is that it? And followed by, what even was that? And I was really loath to push on and read book 2, to be honest. But I'm really glad I did. So I went straight into the drawing of the 3, and within 2 or 3 chapters of that, I was hooked. And then I powered through the rest. But ever since then, when I recommended the Dark Tower to people, and I've done a whole series like looking at the reading order of the Dark Tower as well, I always say to people, make sure you read books 1 and 2 back to back, because there's every chance you will finish book 1, The Gunslinger, and be like, what even is this? And you'll be tempted to bail. And then you do miss out on an incredible story. And going back for a second, or in this case a third time, you get so much more from The Gunslinger. So I'm anticipating to get a lot of insight this time around. I liked it a lot more second time around. And comparing the 2 versions, I'm really excited for. But it's really interesting that King himself acknowledges in that foreword that the original version, which is the only one I've read before, you know, it's kind of clunky, it's kind of difficult to read, and it doesn't really get going until you get into the drawing of the 3. He is impressively self-aware, and the tower is clearly something that he holds really dear to him. And that was nearly taken away from all of us because he was hit while out walking. He was hit by a minivan, put in hospital in 1999. And at that point, we'd only had 4 books of the final 7, or 8 if you count the in-between novel that we later got. So yeah, there was a potential. If he'd have gone then, the tower would have gone with him. So he was obviously keen to get it finished. But yeah, that's kind of my relationship. I've always found it to be interesting, but not the easiest to read. Not the thing about the tower that I enjoy the most. And more a stepping stone to get into the actual meat of the story. Now, I'm not going to be going on to the drawing of the 3 for a number of months because I'm doing a chronological reread, and we're only in 1982. Drawing of the 3 was 87. We've got a lot to get through before then. So it's going to be interesting reading it in that context. I remember certain bits. I remember Roland and Jake under the mountains. I remember Roland's coming of age story about how he bested his teacher with the use of his bird. And I remember some other bits and bobs, like Zoltan, the rude crow, and the donkey, and Turl, and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm just intrigued to see what we get this time and to see the differences between the 2. So I think it's almost time to jump into the vlog. I'll show you my editions again. So there's my original one, and there's my revised one. Let's get into my vlog of me rereading The Gunslinger, and then I'll come back here afterwards for all of that final thoughts stuff, and we'll do a bit of analysis. So long days, pleasant nights, and may you have twice the number. I'll see you in a bit. So, part 1 done, The Gunslinger. And definitely interesting to compare the 2. In King's intro, he said he only added like 9,000 more words in the revised edition. And I'm guessing that most of that comes in this section, because the differences between The Gunslinger in the original and the revised one fundamentally it's the same story, but there seems to be lots added in the revised one. The whole thing with Ali having the letter with 19 on, there's just, that adds a load more to it, and there's just lots more going on in Tull that we don't get in the original version. But some things I noticed. So in the original one, there's a few things I'll pick up in the things I noticed for the first time later on. But there are some classic King stuff, I guess. Obviously, we get Sylvia Pitson and her phenomenal breasts like earthworks. Great, thanks for that. We get the infamous gun barrel abortion scene, which is just grim. We get someone else whose breasts are thrust with overripe grandeur. Yeah, some obsession with boobs here. There's a really great line about how Roland realizes he was screaming the whole time when he was shooting people. That's pretty good. I'll probably come back to that in my favourite quotes part of it. But I think what's more interesting is looking at what got changed here. So, the very start of the section, the very start of the book, in the revised edition, it says 19 resumption, which if you know how this saga ends, that's quite a big one. But it's the little word choices that I find interesting. So, right at the start, we get the word parsecs change for eternity. And I guess King was talking about how the original version was perhaps not that easy to read. That's probably something like that. But then there's more interesting ones here, like the man in black's essential humanity becomes possible humanity. We get first reference of Car in the updated version as well. We get a mention of a Billy Bumbler. We get All Saints' Eve changed for Reap, which kind of lines up with Wizard and Glass a bit more. We get Miles changed for Wheels, which is a mid-world measurement. We get the Bible changed for the Good Book, which again is a mid-worldy type thing. We get mentions of Crimson King and Lamerck Industries, a train, all these little things being seeded that are going to come back later in the series. So yeah, I mean, in terms of this first section, it's fine. Like it's always one that I remember sort of not massively loving, just because again, this is a book that is difficult to just drop yourself into, and this, aside from the opening passage, which is great, like not just the first sentence, which is the famous one, but the whole first section of the book is brilliant, beautifully written, very evocative. But then from that point, like it's Roland like talking about Tull and stuff. Like it's fine. But for what this series goes on to become, it's a bit flat. So yeah, I guess it's okay. Better than I remembered, definitely. More interesting than I remembered. And so far, the revised edition is definitely the better of the two. But one thing that my revised edition doesn't have, which I think is a crying shame, is this famous illustration. Roland with Zoltan on his shoulder. The fact they didn't put that in the revised one, in this revised edition anyway, a crime. An absolute crime. They had forgotten the face of their father. So, anyway, first section done. Yeah, it's fine. Let's crack on with it, shall we? So I'm going to cover two more sections in this little update. So the way station and the Oracle and the mountains. Both kind of nice pieces of writing as a sort of interesting short story exercise. And they do enough, I guess. But again, they feel a bit tame compared to what the rest of the Dark Tower series would be. So obviously the way station is where we meet Jake. He's this very confused kid who appears to have come from another world. And then the Oracle in the Mountains is first signs of Jake and Roland building a relationship, building a friendship. Obviously having an encounter with that Oracle who basically has sex with Roland, but ultimately did want to try and get Jake. And Roland agrees to do that to hear the Oracle's prophecy. And that's where the Oracle prophesizes about basically Eddie and Susanna, who are going to turn up in the next book, and also prophesies that Jake ain't gonna survive, which is probably one of the most powerful bits I've read so far. And then they catch up to the Man in Black briefly, and he again sort of hints that Jake ain't going to be around, and Jake himself at this point has realised what's going on. But yeah, I found all that stuff interesting. The way station section was a bit meh. It was fine. The bit where Roland goes into the basement and there's a speaking demon there, that was pretty fun. That was pretty creepy. And where he puts Jake in a trance and we get the flashback to his death. Some gnarly writing there, which I kind of liked. But yeah, just a few things I noticed. So Roland seems to think that Jake is like the age of 9 in the original version, which is way younger than Jake reads and that I've ever imagined Jake being. We also get our first mention of the tower in this section, which feels pretty important. We also get a bit that King references in his foreword to the updated edition, where we get reference to the good man being in the town of Farson, and then of course later the good man is Farson. So that town of Farson gets changed to Taunton, which is a place in Devon, here in the UK, which was surprising for me to read. But yeah, and then there's this section on the hanging of Hax, the cook, which is kind of interesting and odd at the same time. I guess it's kind of a bit of a coming of age thing for Roland, but I don't know, a little bit kind of, is this just padding stuff out here? And then I mean, in terms of things that get added in the in the revised edition, so we get a mention of North Central Positronics. We get stars and planets named to like Old Star and Old Moon, and just doing more to build the world and the lore of the Dark Tower stuff, which yeah, I get that. We get like hinting at an idea that maybe Martin is the Man in Black, because there's Martin, Walter, and later Flag, who all sort of get mixed up, and that's something that King tried to address in the revised edition. And I guess when we get to the final section where Roland catches up to the Man in Black, we'll know a bit more about that. We get Stephen Deshane, Roland's dad, named. And we get some timelines updated. So in the original, it took 10 years for the land to fall to the good man, and in the revised one it was 5 years. But overall, very little changed actually for both sections. One thing I did like in the Oracle section, there was a lovely bit of foreshadowing, where he's got his pill that he's going to take before he goes off to the Oracle, and he's rolling it between fingers that would all too soon be gone, which is a big spoiler for the start of Drawing of the Three. And also the Oracle has extra bits in her prophecy that mentions things like other worlds and doorways and roses and stuff like that. So again, kind of seeding those ideas earlier on in this book. But yeah, I mean, these two sections are fine. There's a bit of movement, and I think they're better than the first section because they're largely actually present adventures. The Oracle and the Mountain section is definitely the standout so far. But anyway, like 2/3 of the way through the Gunslinger now, so we're on to meet the Slow Mutants, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is the good bit. Okay then, the Slow Mutants part of the Gunslinger. Perhaps the most iconic part of this book, I guess, because of what happens to Jake. Yeah, I really like this section. I mean, there's not much to talk about in terms of differences between the revised edition and not, because it's one of those sections where not much was added. There are a few names tidied up and a few words changed to make it just a bit more readable. But I think when you get to this part of the book, you've just got to go with the story. And this book within this story, so the Slow Mutants part, is so pivotal because of two sacrifices that we see Roland making, and not just because of the sacrifices, but because we see what lengths he's willing to go to. So there's the coming of age tale where he gets the better of his teacher Court, and he uses David the Hawk as his weapon, and he sacrifices that bird to accelerate his own coming of age, to get hold of those guns, to go out and fuck a prostitute, but to set on the tail of Martin and to start channeling that teenage angst and anger into weaponry and just taking control of his destiny. And there are lots of ways of looking at it, can't you? Like you do get the sense that Roland did care for David the bird, but also you can see that he clearly sees him as an animal, as a throwaway thing, as a weapon, and isn't afraid to use him, knowing that using him means that he dead. You know, he goes into that bird and says, "I think you're going to die today." No think about it. Of course he's going to fucking die. So it shows a ruthlessness of Roland there, which we get hinted at in this book, but it's the first time we really get it, is in this section. And it's really important to tee that up at the start of this section to help build the dread towards the climax, when Jake is left dangling over that drop in the cave under the mountain and just says, "Go then, there are other worlds than these," and then silently falls to his death. And again, it's the ruthlessness of Roland. He's faced with a choice of save this boy that he realizes he loves, or go ahead and catch up with the man in black. And it's almost like Jake makes the decision for him, mainly because Roland clearly can't articulate it at that point, but in his heart, both of them in their hearts, they know what Roland's going to do. And I think it's really interesting for setting up Roland as this character in the context of the whole Dark Tower piece in particular, because he's difficult to like at this point, right? We get to this book, he's this sort of, we can deal with him being this surly, almost introverted, lone wolf type character. Yeah, we've seen him slay an entire town, but kind of justified because they were going to fuck him up otherwise. And then we sort of warm to him a bit as he takes on Jake and teaches him stuff. But then this, like, we see from his past that bird is disposable, and we see from his present that Jake is disposable. And it immediately makes you as a reader think, okay, how much do I like this guy, given that he's our protagonist? So if you're reading the Gunslinger, if you've read this at the start of doing the whole Dark Tower journey, knowing that Roland is your main character, it's like, well, do I want another 6 books with him? Like, who else is he going to kill, kind of thing? Who else is he going to ruin? And it's fascinating reading it at this point in his chronology as well, because at this point, the Gunslinger was just this weird little curio almost. So it almost shows King to be, what am I looking for? Not overly sentimental about this lead character. And he shows him to be flawed, and he shows him to be complex and difficult to like. Again, which I really like. And I think that ups how much I like this book. Because on a story level, it's fine, but I'm not that into Westerns, I'm not that into fantasy. But on a character level, it's fascinating. And it's this section of this book that really gives us Roland properly for the first time. Like, he is ruthless. He is a junkie. He's a tower junkie. Like, that's a phrase within the King community, but he is the OG tower junkie. He's so driven towards getting to that goal that everything else is disposable. So I really enjoyed this section. Like, the David story was a little anticlimactic to what I remember it being, but still good, still fun. And the Jake stuff, like I say, it's important because it tells us that Roland is willing to do what has to be done. And Jake starts to sense that Roland's gonna go on without him. The man in black sort of is hinting at it as well. And the dread that just builds up. And of course we get these sort of fake outs with the slow mutants attacking, or the handcart perhaps not being in the best condition. And then they get so close, and then it all goes to shit. And we leave this section of the book with, you're kind of like, okay, wow, like King says in On Writing, like talking about killing your darlings, like he kills his darling Jake there, kills Roland's darling Jake, and then it's off to for them to have their palaver for the final part of this book. So yeah, that was a bit of a rant and a waffle, wasn't it? But I feel like this is like the fundamental section of this book. Everything else is kind of interesting and table setting. But this, for this such a slim volume, we get so much about Roland here in this particular section that, yeah, I just find it fascinating. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, there's not much left to read in this now. It's just that conversation with the Man in Black. So let's get on to that, shall we? So we make it to the final part of the Gunslinger, where Roland has his palaver with the Man in Black. A really interesting section. So we get some revelations here. We get the Man in Black doing tarot card reading for Roland. We see things that tee up characters that we're going to meet in the Drawing of the Three. I won't say too much more on that because this is a chronological reread, so don't want to spoil stuff we haven't got to yet. But interesting, so in the original version, we discover that the Man in Black is not Martin, because the Man in Black talks about the vision that he gives to Roland, having shown that to Martin. But we do discover that the Man in Black is Walter, whereas in the revised edition, that vision gets shown to Roland's father, and actually we find out that not only is the Man in Black Walter, but that Walter is also Martin. And if memory serves me correct, we'll find out more revelations about Walter, Martin, Man of Black in subsequent entries into the Dark Tower world. But yeah, this section has just got some incredible writing when it comes to that vision and this idea. Roland sees the universe and it is a blade of purple grass, and he's this tiny little atom on this blade of grass, and they start riffing on this idea that a blade of grass contains multiple universes. The Man in Black talks about, like, how can you fathom the idea of, like, if you burn a twig, how many millions of existences are you burning at that point? And honestly, like, that section, the more I thought about it, my brain doesn't cope well with thinking like big stuff like that. When I start, doing that classic shot of zooming out and zooming out and zooming out, I realise quite how small I am in the grand scheme of just everything and how insignificant I am. That unnerves me. That makes me feel a bit woozy. And yeah, this section of, like, we're talking about the idea of sort of kicking sand around and disturbing thousands of universes, the twig, being on a blade of grass, all of that kind of stuff. That existential horror, because it is horrific, it's actually some of the scariest stuff in this book for me, because I just don't like thinking that big and don't like being reminded of how futile and pointless every fucking thing is. So yeah, some incredible writing in this section, like, and sort of a satisfying ending to the book, I guess. Like, it's the revised edition is more accessible, keeping on theme with the entire book, but also keeping on theme with the entire book. The whole thing is still like a bit of a curio, especially at this point in King's bibliography. It's like, okay, where is this going? And by the end of it, I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm not exactly itching to get onto the Drawing of Three, but at the very least, I'm sort of curious and feel like I've got at least a base level understanding of who Roland is and what behaviours he tends towards. Did I notice anything else interesting? So the ageless stranger who is mentioned in the original text as being from England is no longer from England in the revised edition. We get mentions of a beast in the original edition, which are taken out of the revised edition. I think that might be the Crimson King, who we're going to meet later on, but it's all still a bit vague. Something that really leapt out at me was where Man in Black talks to Roland about resuming his quest. And Roland's like, what do you mean resume? I haven't done any of this before. And it's kind of like, yeah, interesting knowing where the series goes. And if you've never read the series before, like, bear in mind that the revised edition starts with the word resumption, and the Man in Black talks about resuming your quest. If you can try and bear that in mind, please do. So yeah, I think I'll try and articulate some better thought out thoughts in the next part of this video. But yeah, done with the Gunslinger. So see you in a few seconds for something more coherent. Okay, there's the vlog done. Before we get into the final analysis, just give me a couple of seconds for a couple of quick plugs, and feel free to skip if you're really desperate, but just hear me out. All the links for what you need are in the description, and those are my collection of award-winning short stories, or my award-winning collection of short stories, Once More Around the Sun. You can find that below. You can also find a link to my range of Stephen King themed band shirts, my Stephen King trivia book that I published in 2022, and if you like what I'm doing on this channel, you can become a constant viewer, get access to extra content, early access to regular content, and support me directly. Otherwise, if none of that is doable, I love having you here watching these videos. Subscribe if you haven't done so already so you don't miss anything in the future. And hey, consider telling a friend about this channel too. That's it. That's all the plugs done. Let's crack on with this reread of The Gunslinger. Okay, so reread of The Gunslinger is done, and we're now at the point in the video where go through all of the analysis in the different sections. So coming up, I'm going to give you the Gunslinger's score on the Stephen King bingo card. I'm going to give you 3 pros about the Gunslinger, so 3 things I really liked, 3 cons, 3 things I didn't like. I'm going to go through things that I noticed for the first time in this reread, so that's 19s, character names, references to other King events, all of those kind of things. I'm going to pick out my favourite lines in this book, and I'm going to give it a score out of 5. And of course, this time we're giving it a score out of 5 Dark Towers. But before all of that, just some overall thoughts having got to the end of my reread of both versions of The Gunslinger. I guess the big one is that the revised edition is definitely the better of the two. King said in his intro he wanted to make it more readable and tie it into the wider series, and he achieves both brilliantly. Now, that's not to say that this revised edition is just like one of those books you can suddenly jump into, because it isn't. It's still pretty fucking weird, it's still quite opaque at times, but the world building is more considered, and he just does away with some unnecessary words that make the language just a bit too flouncy to enjoy. It's still a read that at the end of it, I'm not exactly gunning to get into the rest of the Dark Tower series. And knowing that I'm going to be waiting months until I pick up the Drawing of the Three because of doing this chronological reread, like, I'm kind of fine with that. I'll almost probably get to the point where it's like, oh yeah, that Gunslinger book, that was a weird little curio, wasn't it? But yeah, the revised edition definitely works. And if you've got the choice between the two, while the original one is interesting to read, I would absolutely recommend going for the revised one. So as the title suggests, this book is about Roland, and we get a lot of interesting stuff about Roland's character. I talked about it quite extensively in the vlog, particularly the 2 scenes of sacrifice that Roland makes. I think what I find interesting is that he's not really likeable enough, Roland, as a character to be our out-and-out hero yet, and he's not shown signs of being this like swashbuckling fantasy cowboy. But he's not really an anti-hero either, not quite yet. He's kind of unlikable in this, which is what I remember him being, but this reread has just reinforced that. What is clear is that he's ruthless, he's driven, he's determined, he's very well trained, and he's not that great with people. I almost wonder if actually Roland is a little bit neurodivergent, and I mean that in a very positive way. I think it's great that we can have characters like this represented in stories that have gone back 40 plus years at this point. But just by the way he interacts with people and some of his actions, yeah, just makes me wonder about Roland. And kind of, I'm interested in what he's doing. I'm interested in who he is and how he's going about it. I don't necessarily like him yet, but I am intrigued. And I think that's a sign of a strong character. The other characters we get here, mainly Jake and the Man in Black. Jake kind of doesn't do that much for me here. We obviously only get him for part of it. I think he's a much more interesting prospect than he actually turns out to be in the book. And the Man in Black, fine. He gets on my nerves a bit when he's doing all of the giggling and stuff like that. But as a figurehead for them to be chasing, yeah, sure, I'll take it. So other things worth mentioning here, kind of stuff I covered in the vlog. The slow mutant section is great. Those scenes of sacrifice are really important. I've already mentioned that, but they are really good. And the final conversation between Roland and the Man in Black. Wonderful scene, full of incredible writing. That stuff where it starts going cosmic and existential and freaking me out. Yeah, really effective. And if nothing else, this book is full of lush writing. Like the opening sentence, the Man in Black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That's gone down in literary history as one of the greatest opening sentences of a book ever. And rightly so. But what was eye-opening on this reread was just how good that whole opening part is. The writing is just stunning from start to finish. And it has a lilt to it. It has a cadence that is almost poetic, but without being obnoxious and pretentious. It's great. It really draws you in. And while the novel from that point onwards maybe sort of fades in and out for me in terms of how much I'm into it, that opening is just some incredible writing. I think if anyone dares to say to you that Stephen King can't write, just show them that opening chapter of The Gunslinger and then just wait for their apologies to come once they're done. So in many ways, I think this is certainly an intriguing story. It's a bit of a curio at this point in King's bibliography. And ultimately, yeah, it's fine. Like, it's not my favourite part of the Dark Tower saga. And I'm now very, very excited to eventually get to the drawing of the three and pick this up where this story really begins. But there's a lot of exquisite moments here. And yes, certainly a fun one to go back and reread. So let's jump into my usual sections, shall we? And we'll start with the Stephen King bingo card. So the bingo card, you might remember, is 19 things that I put together on a bingo card that I reckon crop up time and time again in Stephen King books. And I'm using that as one of my guides through this reread, just to see how many points these books score against each other. So for The Gunslinger, out of 19, we get 6. So if you're interested, 6 puts it just above Rage and just below The Long Walk. And what are those 6 things? Well, we get 19, obviously. We get some amazing sex for the woman. Ali in Tull is very pleased with the service that Roland delivers to her. We get that was the last time we saw them alive type thing. We get a blue work shirt. We get lots of references to breasts. Half a point for the old man, young kid relationship because, frankly, I'm not entirely sure quite how old Roland is or how young Jake is, really. So there's definitely an age gap there. But this particular trope, I think in my head, the old dudes, are way older. And half a point for a dead dog as well, because it wasn't a dog, it was a mule. But kind of close enough, right? Did I miss anything though? Should it be higher than 6? Let me know in the comments. So let's go on to my pros and cons. So 3 things I liked and 3 things I disliked about The Gunslinger. Start with the pros. Obviously the opening. I've already talked about it. That section is just wonderfully written. And yeah, absolutely magnificent. Second pro, the revised Tull shootout. Yeah, that's kind of like the blockbuster sequence that first part of the book really needs, and it's just so much more bombastic in the revised edition. So good job there. And then my third one, even though it freaked me out, it's the universe stuff, it's the existential stuff. Like, yeah, just spectacular writing. Got under my skin, made me marvel and made me terrified at the same time. So, good work. Let's go on to the cons then. 3 things I didn't like. The gun barrel abortion. No thanks. Second thing, even the revised edition is still quite opaque. It's still not particularly easy to get into. Still a little bit pretentious, let's face it. There's just something there that holds me back from loving it. So, yeah, that has to be a con. My third con, very minor one, but in this revised edition I have, there's no illustrations here, and the illustrations are wonderful. So, yeah, what's going on with that? But what did you like, and what did you dislike about the Gunslinger? Do let me know in those comments. Okay, time to go through my list of things I spotted for the first time. Trying to work out the best way to do this. I'll do the ones from the original text first, and then for revised edition. So, obviously these ones in the original text, a lot of them are going to transfer over anyway. So, we get a reference of somebody wanting to sick their dog on someone, which is a big phrase in the body. We get lights that will drive a man blind, which made me think of the deadlights from It. We get somebody talking about bodice rippers, books, which are what one of the characters in later writes. We get the blue work shirts. We get mentioned that somebody did not flinch, which makes me think of Never Flinch. There was a mention when they were near a cave that Roland hinted that there might be bats at the back of the cave, which made me think of Cujo. They find some mummified folk at the station under the mountains, which made me think of The Stand. We get a reference of somebody saying we all shine on, which of course made me think of The Shining. And then in the revised edition, things that I picked up on top of that. So we get a reference of a crow perched like a gargoyle, which made me think of Nightmares in the Sky, that book of gargoyle photos that King wrote an essay for. We also have Man in Black saying to Roland as you resume your quest, which is obviously ties into the resumption and ties into stuff that is going to come into play later on in the Dark Tower series. When Man in Black's talking about Susanna, talks about having two faces and saying she broke the blue plate. And that not only references what we're going to get in the Gunslinger, but in Dreamcatcher, I think, one of the characters breaks into someone's house and breaks a special plate. And we get mention of the King's red hand, which obviously makes me think of the Crimson King, which we'll see in Insomnia and later in the Tower stuff. So, yeah, not as many things as in other books, but there you go. What did I miss? Let me know in the comments. So when it comes to my favourite line, I mean, obviously the stuff at the start, the Man in Black fled across the desert, the Gunslinger followed, all of that stuff, great. I mean, immediately followed by the desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless and without features save for the faint cloudy haze of the mountains which sketched themselves on the horizon and the devil grass which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. That's all great. But the thing that really got me was this quite long paragraph from the Man in Black, but it ties into all that existential stuff again and it just really worked. So, if you fell outward to the limit of the universe, would you find a board fence and signs reading dead end? No. You might find something hard and rounded, as the chick must see the egg from the inside. And if you should peck through that shell or find a door, what great and torrential light might shine through your opening at the end of space? Might you look through and discover our entire universe is but part of one atom on a blade of grass? Might you be forced to think that by burning a twig you incinerate an eternity of eternities? That existence rises not to one infinite, but to an infinity of them. Perhaps you saw what place our universe plays in the scheme of things, as no more than an atom in a blade of grass. Could it be that everything we can perceive, from the microscopic virus to the distant Horsehead Nebula, is contained in one blade of grass that may have existed for only a single season in an alien time flow? What if that blade should be cut off by a scythe? When it begins to die, would the rot seep into our own universe and our own lives, turning everything yellow and brown and desiccated? Perhaps it's already begun to happen. We say the world has moved on. Maybe we really mean that it has begun to dry up. Just really good, right? Yeah. Let me know your favourite line in the comments. Okay, let's wrap this up then with my score out of 5 Dark Towers. And I'm being awkward. I'm giving it 3.666 recurring Dark Towers because it's better than a 3.5 for me, but not quite as good as a 3.75. So that puts it overall in my rankings so far. That puts the Gunslinger in 8th place, below Cujo and The Long Walk, and above Roadwork. And for the 80s, that means it's my second favourite of the 80s so far. So 8th place, it's top 10 at the moment. Is it going to stay there? No, but hey, let's see where we go. What score would you give the Gunslinger out of 5? Do let me know below. And hey, we've made it to the end of the reread. Thank you for watching this far. Really hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, what we got next on the reread? Different seasons. Oh boy, looking forward to that. But, of course, nearly left before doing this. Before we can properly finish the reread, we've got to go over to Goodreads and check out some of those 1-star reviews of the Gunslinger, haven't we? So join me very soon for when I do that. Bye.